I'm Brian Kearney Grieve. I'm with the Atlantic Philanthropies in the Republic of Ireland, in the Dublin office, and I work in the Reconciliation and Human Rights Program. So what I wanted to talk about was funders and how we fund, not only what we fund. So often when we get together as foundations, we talk about the issues that we're funding and not often about how we fund those issues. And an issue that I want to raise is that of if we expect our organizations and the grantees that we fund to think strategically, are we actually funding them in a way which allows them to act strategically? And so what I mean by that is, very often when we fund organizations, we fund them on a project basis. We don't fund core, we fund them on an annual basis. But if we're really serious about addressing the core issues, the root causes, and achieving systemic reform and systemic change, we need to think about funding organizations in a way which allows them to not only think but also act strategically. And so what I mean by that is, if we start funding, or if we fund organizations on a core basis but also on a multi-annual basis, what does this allow organizations to do? One, it allows them to attract and retain top quality staff that you actually need to be able to do this work. It provides the organizations with that security of funding that they can really start acting strategically with a long-term frame rather than just an annual frame. And that's critically important because it allows an organization then to become a resource to those that they're trying to influence, not just a voice trying to influence them. So if organizations are around for a time, then they start to be recognized for their expertise, which changes the dynamic of the relationship of those that they're trying to influence. So I think that's critically important, and one of the key reasons and arguments that I put forward for why foundations should be looking at funding core multi-annual to their grantees. The other point that I wanted to make was, if you're doing core multi-annual funding, it doesn't mean that you need to be rigid. I think the one thing that you need to be rigid about is that you're funding a specific set of outcomes. Now, over time, organizations are going to learn what is working and what isn't working in terms of achieving those outcomes. So it suggests that you need to be flexible about the approach that they adopt and be engaged with the grantee in adapting the strategy that they're using to achieve those outcomes, not necessarily being flexible about the outcomes and the impact to be achieved. So that's the other point on there. And then the final point I wanted to make was this whole issue of attribution versus contribution. I think we put undue pressure on organizations to claim the win for themselves and of their own. And I think if we really look at social change, it's a combination of partners that come together to achieve impact. And asking an organization to claim that as their contribution is counterproductive to getting organizations to collaborate to achieve change. So a challenge to foundations, I think, is how do we move away from this contribution and from attribution to a single organization to more of a contribution type model, and are we happy with that as foundations, that we're also making a contribution to the resolution of issues rather than having to claim these for ourselves in order to be able to continue to fund in these areas. So a challenge to us as foundations. Yeah, that's it. Thanks very much.